the land of fire, did not know what silence sounded like before he arrived. There were birds in the canopy above Konoha's northern forest, hawks and sparrows that had nested in those trees for generations, creatures so accustomed to the sounds of shinobi training, explosive tags, and the distant percussion of jutsu that nothing startled them anymore. Then the rift opened. It did not roar. It did not crackle with the dramatic electricity of summoning jutsu or bloom with the ceremonial smoke of akuchios. It simply tore, a vertical wound in the fabric of the world, roughly the height of 3 men, bleeding light the color of dying embers, Norse runes collapsing inward on themselves as the dimensional seam failed. Every bird within a half-mile radius launched into the sky simultaneously. The forest floor shook once, hard, like a giant had pressed its palm flat against the earth and pushed. Then Kratos fell through. He landed on both feet. The impact crater was 4 meters wide and half a meter deep. Stone and root and compacted earth exploded outward in a ring, and the trees nearest the landing point cracked at their bases from the shockwave alone. He did not stumble. He did not brace. He simply arrived, gray-skinned, red-marked, eyes like cold iron, the Leviathan axe strapped across his back and the blades of chaos coiled at his hips like sleeping serpents, remembering what it felt like to be awake. He straightened to his full height and looked at the world that had swallowed him. The air was wrong, not poisoned wrong. It carried something he had no name for in Norse or Greek, a current beneath the physical, like pressure against a scar that had never fully healed. He had felt divine energy his entire life, had bathed in ichor and absorbed the essence of gods he had personally sent to whatever waited beyond death. This was different. This was everywhere. Not concentrated in a temple or a person or a relic, woven into the living tissue of the world itself, moving through the trees, the soil, the distant sounds of human habitation. Whatever this place was, it was saturated with power that did not belong to any pantheon he recognized. He had no time to examine it further. They came from the trees the way water comes through a cracked dam, all at once, from every direction, ANBU operatives in white masks dropping from the canopy in formation, tanto drawn, chakra flaring in patterns he could not yet read but could feel the intent behind clearly enough. 14 of them, professionals. The kind of soldiers who had been trained since childhood to be extensions of a village's will rather than individuals with names. He recognized the archetype immediately. He had been one once. "Identify yourself," the lead operative said. The mask was a cat. The voice was female, controlled, giving nothing away. "This is sovereign territory of Konohagakure. You are in violation of the border seal. Surrender chakra flow and submit to detainment." Kratos looked at her for a long moment. "I have no chakra," he said. His voice was what it always was, low, continental, carrying the particular gravity of a man who had spoken sentences that ended civilizations. "And I do not submit." The cat-masked operative's hand moved. Every ANBU in the formation responded in the same breath, a coordinated lunge from all sides, tanto and chakra, and years of synchronized combat training converging on a single point. It was, by any Konoha standard, an overwhelming response to a single unidentified intruder. It would have neutralized a Jonin. It would have given a cage pause. Kratos caught the first blade between 2 fingers. He did not squeeze hard enough to shatter it immediately. He held it, let the operative feel the absolute immovability of his grip, let the rest of the formation's attacks arrive and register against his body. Tanto scored lines across his arms and torso that would have dismembered a normal man. They left marks on him the way a knife leaves marks on old stone, present but meaningless. He felt them. He did not flinch. Then he moved. He did not use the axe. He did not draw the blades. He used his hands because hands were enough, because they had always been enough when gods had come at him with everything they had, and he had decided gods were insufficient. He caught the cat-masked operative by the wrist and redirected her momentum into 2 of her colleagues. The collision was catastrophic, not fatal, because he was not, in this moment, trying to kill, but definitive. 3 ANBU hit the tree line hard enough to crack bark and lose consciousness on impact. The remaining 11 recalibrated instantly, spreading their formation, one of them running through a sequence of hand signs with the speed of genuine mastery. A dragon of water, the size of a house, detonated against Kratos' chest. He slid back 6 inches, through the crater he had already made. When the water cleared, he was still standing. His expression had not changed. Something shifted in the surviving ANBU, not fear exactly, because fear in a Konoha operative was a thing that had been trained into a tool rather than a response, but recognition. The recognition that the category of threat they were looking at did not match any category they had prepared for. "Enough," Kratos said. He reached up and took the Leviathan axe from his back. He did not throw it. He did not attack. He simply held it at his side, letting them see it, letting the frost that crept from the blade's edge reach the air between them. "I did not come here to destroy your soldiers. I came through something I did not choose, and I am in a world I do not yet understand." He looked at the cat mask directly. "Take me to whoever rules this place. I will speak to them once." The warning in the final word was geological. The ANBU regrouped around their wounded. The cat operative, 3 ribs cracked, shoulder dislocated, still standing, assessed the situation with the cold logic her training demanded. 12 operatives, 7 combat capable, 1 target who had absorbed a water dragon jutsu and not moved. She made the only rational decision available to her. She sent a signal flare. Within 4 minutes, 2 Jonin arrived. Within 9, a message hawk was in the air toward the Hawkage Tower. Within 20, the northern quadrant of Konoha was on emergency lockdown, and Tsunade was standing at the head of a war table looking at a report that described a gray-skinned giant who had walked through 14 ANBU like they were weather. She read it twice, then she poured herself a drink. In the forest, Kratos sat on a fallen tree at the edge of the crater he had made and waited. He studied the way chakra moved through the environment, the distant signatures of the village, the particular flavor of the power concentrated in the mountain faces carved with giant heads he could see above the tree line. Monuments to rulers. He had seen those before. He knew what they meant. He knew what the people who built them believed about themselves. He thought about Olympus. He thought about what Olympus had looked like before he had finished with it. He thought about Atreus, somewhere behind a door between worlds that no longer existed, and the grief that lived in his chest like a coal that never cooled pressed itself flat and hard against his ribs. He had told the boy that their journey would end. He had not anticipated it ending like this, alone, in a world that smelled of power and hierarchy, and the particular rot that sets into any system built on the belief that those who are strongest deserve to govern those who are not. The shinobi world had no gods as far as he could determine, but it had something worse. It had men who had decided they were the next best thing. He would learn this place. He would find a way back to Atreus. And if the rulers of this world moved against him before he could, if they came at him with armies instead of 14 ANBU, if they decided that the correct response to something they did not understand was to attempt to erase it, then he would teach them the same lesson he had taught Zeus. The same lesson he had taught every throne he had ever stood beneath. No throne was permanent, no power was absolute, and no ruler in any world across any pantheon had ever been able to make Kratos kneel. He closed his eyes and listened to the foreign world breathe around him. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The emergency summit was Tsunade's idea, but the fear behind it belonged to everyone. She had called it within 6 hours of the first ANBU report, burning messenger hawks to all 4 other hidden villages simultaneously. Not a request, a directive, the kind of language that only got used when the alternative was worse than the politics of demanding it. The 5-Cage Summit was a mechanism that had been used exactly once in recent memory, convened in the land of iron under conditions of existential necessity. Tsunade was invoking it again, and every cage who received the message read the subtext clearly. Whatever had arrived in the land of fire was not a missing nin, not a rogue Jinchuriki, not an Akatsuki operative. It was something outside the existing vocabulary of shinobi threat assessment, and outside that vocabulary was where the world's most dangerous mistakes got made. They gathered in Konoha itself this time. There was no time for neutral ground. The Reikage arrived first, because it always arrived first to anything that smelled like a contest, his body crackling with residual lightning release even at rest, his aide Mabui at his shoulder and his eyes already scanning the room for whatever needed hitting. Gaara came next, the Kazekage still young but carrying the particular stillness of a man who had looked into the worst version of himself and survived it, sand curling lazily at his feet, teal eyes assessing everything without urgency. The Mizukage, Mei Terumi, arrived with the diplomatic grace of someone who had rebuilt an entire village's identity from the ruins of its own brutality, her demeanor warm on the surface and titanium underneath. The Tsuchikage, Anoki, floated in on his dust release and said nothing to anyone, which was how everyone knew he was the most unsettled. Kratos was brought in under what Tsunade had internally classified as ceremonial escort, 12 Jonin, 4 ANBU, and the implicit understanding that none of them could actually stop him if he decided to stop being cooperative. He walked into the chamber the way he walked into every room that had ever been designed to make men feel small, without acknowledgement of its architecture, without adjustment of his posture, with the Leviathan axe still on his back, because no one had successfully made the argument that he should leave it outside. He looked at the 5 of them behind their elevated table and felt nothing that resembled deference. Tsunade spoke first. You entered sovereign territory without declaration, incapacitated 14 ANBU operatives, and refused detainment. Under the laws governing all hidden villages, that constitutes an act of aggression. She kept her voice level, which cost her something. We are offering you the opportunity to explain yourself before a response is formally authorized. I did not choose to come here, Kratos said. A rift between worlds deposited me in your forest. Your soldiers attacked. I defended myself without killing them, which required considerable restraint on my part. He let that settle. I want nothing from your villages. I want a way back to my own world. And if no such way exists, Gaara asked. His voice was quiet, genuinely curious rather than provocative, the Kazekige's particular brand of directness that came from having rebuilt his entire relationship with the concept of self from the ground up. Kratos looked at him. Something in Gaara's face, the remnant scarring, the eyes that had seen isolation weaponized against a child, registered in whatever part of Kratos had not yet finished processing what had been done to him in his own youth. Then I will survive here as I have survived everywhere else, he said. Alone, if necessary. That isn't an answer to whether you're a threat, I said. The Reikage had been leaning forward since Kratos entered, the posture of a man physically resisting the impulse to begin the conversation with his fists. You walked through a 14-man ANBU team. You absorbed a water dragon jutsu. I want to know exactly what you are before we decide what to do with you. You want to know if you can kill me, Kratos said. A's jaw tightened. I want to know if I need to. The silence that followed had weight. Kratos studied the Reikage the way he had studied Thor before their first real confrontation, assessing not just power but psychology, the particular flavor of pride that made a strong man dangerous not because of his strength, but because of what he believed his strength entitled him to. A was not cruel. But he was a cage, and cage were, at their foundation, the apex of a system that had been built on the premise that organizing violence under a single authority was the closest thing the shinobi world had to peace. Kratos had spent his entire second life dismantling exactly that premise in a different pantheon. You rule through power, Kratos said, addressing all 5 of them now. You take children and you train them to be weapons, and you point those weapons at each other's villages, and you call the periods between conflicts peace. You keep creatures of catastrophic power. He had seen the reports the Jonin escort had let slip during the walk, seen the word Jinchuriki used in a context that made its meaning unmistakable, sealed inside human beings, because it is more useful to you than freeing them. You carve your faces into mountains so that the people below remember who owns the sky. He paused. I have seen this before. I have seen what it becomes. You don't know anything about what we've built, Tsunade said, and for the first time her voice carried something beyond diplomatic control, something old and tired and genuinely wounded, the voice of a woman who had buried more people than she could count in service of what the village was supposed to mean. I know what it costs, Kratos said. I paid it for Sparta, for Olympus, for every system I served before I understood what I was serving. He moved his gaze across all 5 faces. I am not your enemy yet, but I will not be governed by you. I will not be weaponized by you. I will not be sealed, contained, or conscripted. If you can accept those terms, I will cause no harm to your people while I search for a way home. And if we can't accept those terms, May asked, then you will learn what happened to the last pantheon that decided I was a problem to be managed. The room did not erupt. It went very still instead, which was worse. I was already on his feet, lightning release sparking across his shoulders, the particular electricity of a man whose threshold for political patience had a hard ceiling, and that ceiling was directly overhead. You come into our world, threaten 5 cage simultaneously, and expect us to negotiate. He slammed both fists onto the table, and the table cracked down its center. I don't care what world you're from. You're in ours now. He crossed the chamber in a lightning release chakra mode burst that would have been invisible to anyone without Jonin-level perception. A single devastating straight punch, aimed at Kratos' jaw with the full kinetic amplification of the most physically powerful cage alive. Kratos caught it. Not deflected, not redirected. Caught, one hand, palm open, fingers closing around A's fist at the moment of maximum velocity, absorbing the entire impact through his arm and shoulder, and the divine architecture of a body that had been forged in war against actual deities. The thunderclap of the collision blew every loose object in the chamber against the walls. 3 of the Jonin escort were knocked off their feet by the pressure wave alone. Pushed, every muscle in his body, every ounce of chakra-amplified strength, applied in a single sustained attempt to move the hand that held him. Kratos did not move. He held the rake's fist for 3 seconds, long enough for everyone in the room to fully process what they were seeing, and then he opened his hand and stepped back. I did not come here to fight you, he said quietly, but understand that was not my strength, that was my restraint. Stood where he was, breathing hard, staring at his own fist. The skin across his knuckles was unbroken. Kratos had not tried to hurt him. That somehow was the most unsettling part, not that he had been stopped, but that the thing that stopped him hadn't even been trying. Gaara's voice came through the silence like sand through still water. Let him go. Every head turned to the cage. He could have killed every ANBU operative in that forest, Gaara said. He didn't. He could have walked into this village and caused devastation before we assembled. He didn't. He came here and spoke to us. He looked at Kratos with the particular recognition of someone who knew what it felt like to be defined entirely by the destruction you were capable of rather than the destruction you had chosen not to cause. That means something. The deliberation lasted 4 hours. It ended not with agreement but with a temporary, deeply uncomfortable acknowledgement. Kratos would be given 72 hours of monitored freedom within the Land of Fire, while a research team investigated dimensional rift theory. In exchange, he would not approach any village in force. He accepted the terms without enthusiasm, which everyone in the room correctly interpreted as meaning he would honor them precisely as long as they remained reasonable, and not a second longer. As he was escorted out, Anoki, who had said nothing during the entire proceeding, spoke for the first time. His voice was ancient and flat and certain in the way that very old men who have survived everything become certain. "That man has killed gods," the Tsuchikage said to no one in particular. "I can see it on him the way you can see old battles on old stone. Whatever we decide in the next 72 hours, we should decide it carefully." No one disagreed. Outside, Kratos walked through Konoha streets and felt the village watching him from every window, every rooftop, every shadow where a hidden operative thought concealment meant invisibility. He paid them no attention. He was looking at the children. Training grounds visible through gaps in the buildings. 6-year-olds running formation drills. 8-year-olds learning to suppress chakra signatures. 10-year-olds already learning which grips were most efficient for weapons that had been scaled to their small hands. He had been younger than that when Sparta had first put a weapon in his hands. He walked on. The coal in his chest burned a little hotter. Itachi Uchiha did not receive orders. He received requests shaped like orders, which was a distinction that mattered only to him and that he honored anyway, because the difference between a man who followed instructions and a man who chose to was the only freedom left to someone who had already given everything else away. Tsunade had not sent him officially. Officially, the monitoring detail assigned to Kratos consisted of 2 tracker Jonin and a rotating A and BU pair maintaining perimeter observation at 200 meters. Unofficially, she had looked across the war table after the summit adjourned and found Itachi already looking back at her with those quiet, terminal eyes, and she had said nothing because nothing needed to be said. He was the only person in Konoha whose combination of analytical precision, philosophical depth, and absolute threat ceiling made him the correct instrument for a conversation rather than a confrontation. Everyone else she might have sent would have eventually made it a confrontation. Itachi found Kratos at the edge of the village's eastern training ground, standing at the boundary fence and watching a team of academy students run chakra control exercises under a Chunin supervisor. He had been standing there for 11 minutes, according to the tracker Jonin's report, without moving, without speaking, without any identifiable hostile intent, just watching children learn what they were being built into. "You find it troubling," Itachi said, stopping 6 feet away and folding his hands into his sleeves. Kratos did not turn. "You are not the observers they assigned me." "No. Then you came on your own judgment." "I came because the observers they assigned you would not understand what they were looking at," Itachi said, "and because you are not what the cage think you are." That made Kratos turn. He looked at the young man beside him. Young was the operative word, a fact that sat strangely against the weight Itachi carried in his posture, in the particular economy of his stillness, in eyes that had seen things that should have taken decades to accumulate, and performed the same assessment he had performed on every significant figure he had encountered since arriving. Threat level, psychological architecture. The distance between what this person presented and what they actually were. What he found was unexpected. "You are dying," Kratos said. Itachi's expression did not change. Slowly, yes. "And you continue to serve the village that required your suffering." "I continue to serve the people inside the village," Itachi said, with a precision that was not pedantic but surgical, the correction of a man for whom the distinction was the entire load-bearing structure of his existence. "The institution and the people it contains are not the same thing. I learned that at a cost I won't describe to someone I've just met." Kratos was quiet for a moment. In the training ground, a small girl with her hair in 2 buns was struggling to keep a leaf adhered to her forehead using chakra alone, her face compressed with the specific frustration of a child who understood that she was supposed to be able to do something and could not yet make her body agree. He watched her fail 4 times and try a 5th. "In my world," he said, "I served a system I believed was righteous. I killed for it without question. I sacrificed everything it asked of me." The blades of chaos shifted slightly at his hips, a reflexive motion, like old wounds remembering themselves. The system was built on the suffering of those beneath it and the vanity of those above it. When I finally understood that, I had already become the thing it needed me to be. And so you destroyed it, Itachi said, not a question. Every stone. And did that end the suffering? The question landed with the precision of a blade finding the exact gap in armor it had been searching for. Kratos was still for a long moment, the coal in his chest, the memory of a world where he had pulled Olympus down around everything, and everyone and the mortals below had bled for it as much as the gods above. The world he had tried to protect his son from inheriting. No, he said. Destruction without replacement is just a different kind of ruin. Itachi nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had suspected. Then we arrived at the same understanding through different roads. He turned to look at the training ground himself. I killed my entire clan to prevent a civil war that would have consumed the village. I did it alone so that my brother would not have to carry the weight of it. I accepted being called a monster so that the institution that demanded the act would not have to acknowledge what it had demanded. He paused. I do not tell you this for sympathy. I tell you so that you understand that I am familiar with the particular grief of a man who has already paid every price and is still paying. The silence between them was not empty. It was the specific silence of two people who had found, unexpectedly, the only other person in the room who spoke their language. The villages will not let this remain a negotiation, Kratos said eventually. The rakeage will push for a military response. The others will follow or be left behind. I have seen how power consolidates when it perceives a threat it cannot categorize. You're correct, Itachi said, which is why I came to ask you something before that process completes. He turned to look at Kratos directly, and for just a moment the terminal illness and the accumulated grief and the weight of every choice he had made receded, and what remained was simply intelligence, vast, precise, unflinching. What do you actually want? Not the diplomatic answer you gave the cage, the true answer. Kratos held the gaze. Sharing an eyes, he had been told, eyes that could perceive truth through the architecture of the body's involuntary responses. He did not look away. He had never looked away from anything in his life, and he was not going to begin with a dying young man who had earned the question. I want my son, he said. Atreus. He is somewhere on the other side of the rift that brought me here or lost in the space between. Everything else, the cage, your villages, this world, is secondary to that. But I will not be caged while I search, and I will not allow the search to be used as leverage against me. Itachi was quiet for a moment. A boy, he said softly. My boy. Something moved across Itachi's face, brief, controlled, the shadow of a wound that had never fully closed. Sasuke. Always Sasuke, the name at the center of every sacrifice, the reason the price had ever been worth paying. Then we have something to negotiate with, he said, and his voice had shifted slightly, less the careful diplomat, more the older brother who understood in his bones what it meant to organize your entire existence around protecting someone younger than yourself. There are people in this world with access to dimensional theory beyond what the cage presented at the summit. Orochimaru has conducted research into barriers between worlds as a subset of his immortality experiments. There is also a monk in the land of waves with knowledge of spatial jutsu that predates the hidden village system entirely. You offer me this without condition. I offer it with one condition, Itachi said, that you hear me out before you make any decision about what this world deserves. Kratos studied him. Speak. Hidden village system is not Olympus, Itachi said. I know that from the outside it bears the structural resemblance, centralized power, military hierarchy, the subjugation of extraordinary individuals to institutional will. But it did not emerge from divine vanity. It emerged from exhaustion, from generations of clans destroying each other in endless cycles of vengeance, until men like the first Hokage decided that the alternative to the system, however flawed, was permanent war. He let that land. The system has become corrupt in ways that its founders would not recognize. But the impulse behind it, the desire to protect people from the chaos that existed before it, that impulse was not evil. Good intentions do not redeem corrupt outcomes, Kratos said. No, Itachi agreed immediately. They don't, but they are the difference between a system worth reforming and one worth burning. He looked at Kratos steadily. I am asking you not to burn it before you understand which one it is. It was, Kratos recognized, the most sophisticated argument anyone had made to him in either world. Not a plea, not a threat, not an appeal to mercy or pragmatism or self-interest. An appeal to the distinction between justice and destruction, the exact distinction he had spent his entire second life trying to understand. He did not answer immediately. He looked back at the training ground, where the girl with the buns had finally held the leaf to her forehead for a full 10 seconds, and the Chunin supervisor had marked something in a ledger, and the girl had looked at her own hands with an expression of such uncomplicated triumph that it was almost painful to observe. The tailed beasts, Kratos said finally, creatures of catastrophic power sealed inside human children. Tell me the village system protects them. Itachi opened his mouth, closed it. The silence was its own answer, the silence of a man whose intellectual honesty would not allow him to defend the indefensible even in service of a larger argument. Then we have found the edge of your argument, Kratos said, not cruelly, factually. Yes, Itachi said quietly, we have. Around them, the evening was settling into the land of fire with the particular amber quality of light in a world that had no shortage of beauty despite everything that moved through it. Somewhere in the village a bell was ringing, shift change for the gate guards, or a training period ending, or simply the ordinary percussion of a settlement maintaining itself against the weight of history. I will hear more, Kratos said, but I will not wait indefinitely. And if the rakeage moves armies before the 72 hours expire, the conversation ends. Itachi nodded, understood. He turned to leave, and Kratos spoke once more without turning from the training ground. The brother you sacrificed everything for, is he alive? A pause, yes. Then whatever it cost, it was not wasted. Itachi stood still for a moment with his back to the gray-skinned god of another world's war, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a truth that was also the single most complicated sentence of his entire life. Then he walked back into the village, into the shadows that had always been his most honest home, and began making the arrangements that he hoped might prevent a war neither world could afford. Behind him, Kratos watched the last students leave the training ground as night arrived, and felt the foreign world settle around him like armor he had not agreed to wear. He thought about Atreus. He began to plan. The 72 hours expired at dawn on the third day, and the rakeage had been building his coalition for 48 of them. Kratos knew before the first messenger hawk crossed the sky. He had spent his 2 days of monitored freedom learning the world with the methodical intensity of a man who understood that information was the first weapon in any campaign, moving through the land of fire's outskirts, reading the architecture of power in the way roads connected to villages, the way border posts were staffed, the way civilians moved differently near military installations versus open country. He had been a general before he had been a god. The instincts were older than the divinity and considerably more reliable. What he learned disturbed him in ways the Cage Summit had not. He had gone first to the outskirts of the land of wind, following a thread Itachi had left deliberately loose in their conversation, a reference to Gaara's history that had not been elaborated, spoken with the careful precision of a man who wanted something found without being seen to point at it directly. What Kratos found at the edge of Suna's historical record was not in any official document. It was in the faces of the older civilians he passed on the road, in the way they flinched at the specific word Jinchuriki even in casual conversation, In the story, a retired Chunin had told him at a roadside fire, without knowing Kratos understood enough of the language now to follow the shape of it, if not every word. A village had taken an infant, had sealed a creature of catastrophic, near-divine power inside that infant's body, had then spent that child's entire life treating him as a weapon in storage, isolating him, fearing him, authorizing assassination attempts against him from within his own village's structure, attempts sanctioned not by rogue actors but by the institution itself. The child had been 4 years old during the first attempt. The Kazkij who had ordered it had been the boy's father. Kratos sat with that information for a long time at the roadside fire, after the Chunin had moved on. He thought about what Itachi had said, the difference between a system worth reforming and one worth burning. He thought about the girl holding the leaf to her forehead with her face full of uncomplicated triumph, and he thought about a 4-year-old boy with a monster sealed in his chest being sent assassins by the man who should have been the first wall between him and the world's cruelty. He tried to find the line Itachi had drawn, and he found that it kept moving every time he reached for it. He went to the land of water next, because the second thread Itachi had left was tighter and darker, and he needed to know how dark before he made any decisions. The bloody mist. He had heard the phrase twice in passing, once from an ANBU operative during his escort to the summit, once from a Jonin who had lowered his voice to use it, as though the words themselves retained some viral quality. He found a fisherman on the coast of the land of water who had been old enough to remember the graduation ceremonies, old enough to have watched children sent into arenas to kill each other as the price of becoming shinobi. The ritual institutionalized, systematized, made into policy by a Mizukage who had believed that only those willing to kill their closest companions deserved to wear the village's headband. The fisherman told him this without drama, in the flat tone of a man describing weather that had passed. The flatness was the most disturbing part, the way extreme historical violence became ordinary when it had been experienced as policy rather than atrocity. Kratos walked back toward the land of fire in the dark of the second night, with the Leviathan axe cold against his back, and something resolving in him that had been liquid since he arrived, something taking the specific hard shape of a decision made at the level below conscious thought, where his most consequential decisions had always been made. He was not going to burn the villages, but he was going to break something. He arrived at the border of the land of fire 2 hours before dawn, and found the Raikage's advance force waiting for him. Not a subtle surveillance team, not another ANBU rotation, but 400 shinobi in full combat deployment spread across a 12-kilometer front, lightning and earth release specialists positioned in interlocking fields of fire, every tactical detail communicating the same message with perfect clarity. The 72-hour window had been a formality, and I had decided that the formality was over. The Raikage himself stood at the center of the formation, lightning release chakra mode fully active, his body a barely contained electrical storm. Beside him, 8 Jonin of the Cloud Village's elite, the kind of shinobi who had survived things that killed other shinobi, stood in a configuration that Kratos recognized as a simultaneous strike pattern, designed to prevent any single point of focus. "I gave you 72 hours, I said. His voice carried across the pre-dawn quiet with the weight of a man who had spent his entire life making pronouncements that people obeyed. You used them to conduct unauthorized reconnaissance of sovereign hidden village territory. That ends the agreement." "The agreement was thin to begin with," Kratos said. He stopped walking at 50 meters and looked at the formation with the professional assessment of a Spartan general reading a battlefield. 400, coordinated, motivated, completely insufficient. You have been building this response since the summit ended. Do not pretend the 72 hours were offered in good faith. "Bring him down," I said. They came in 3 waves, because I was a tactician as well as a brawler, and he understood that sequential pressure was more sustainable than a single overwhelming assault against a target that had already demonstrated it could absorb overwhelming assaults. The first wave was Earth release, 20 specialists raising walls and pillars and crushing geometries from the ground itself, attempting to contain Kratos in a cage of compressed stone before the assault elements made contact. Kratos drew the blades of chaos for the first time since his arrival. The chains sang as they extended, fire blooming at the blade's edges, with the particular hellish quality of divine punishment made physical, and he moved through the stone formations the way water moves through a broken dam, not around, through, the blades cutting compressed earth like soft wood, the chain length giving him a geometric reach that made the containment strategy geometrically irrelevant. He was not trying to kill. He was trying to demonstrate again that the distinction between what he was capable of and what he was choosing to do was the only mercy available to anyone on this field. The second wave hit him simultaneously from 8 directions, the Jonin elite, moving in their coordinated pattern, deploying a combination of lightning, water, and wind release in overlapping fields that would have obliterated a Jonin-level target through sheer coverage density. The lightning jutsu scored real damage, divine as he was, electricity at that concentration, and temperature registered as genuine pain, the kind of pain that had once meant something to him, and now meant only information about what he was dealing with. He let 3 of the strikes land fully, absorbing them, using the energy to track the exact position of every attacker through the electromagnetic signature of their chakra. Then he threw the axe. Not at a person. At the ground between the 8 Jonin, calculating the impact radius with the precision of a man who had spent centuries learning exactly how much force was too much. The Leviathan axe hit the earth, and the frost detonation that followed spread outward in a perfect circle, flash freezing the soil and the moisture in the air, and the outer layer of every combatant within 15 meters. 8 Jonin went down, alive, conscious, trapped in ice that would thaw in 20 minutes, completely combat ineffective. He recalled the axe and turned to face the third wave. The third wave didn't come. I had called it back. The Raikage stood in the pre-dawn light and looked at the frozen earth and the grounded Jonin, and the 400 shinobi behind him, who were very carefully not moving. And Kratos could see the exact moment A's tactical mind overrode his pride, and arrived at the conclusion that his pride had been resisting since the summit. "What do you want?" A said. The question was not surrender. It was the Raikage applying the same discipline to his intellect that he applied to his body, recognizing when a different tool was required. "What I told you at the summit," Kratos said, "but I will add to it now." He walked forward until he was 20 meters from and stopped. "The Jinchuriki, the tailed beasts sealed inside human beings. I want to know the full account of how that system was created and who it serves." A's expression shifted. "That is a matter of village security. It is not your concern." A child in the hidden sand was targeted for assassination by his own Kazekage before he could speak in complete sentences, Kratos said. "Because of what was sealed inside him. Tell me whose security that served." The silence that followed was enormous. 400 shinobi standing in pre-dawn dark and nobody breathing quite right. A was quiet for a long time, and Kratos watched the Raikage's face move through something. Not guilt exactly, because A was not a man built for guilt in the conventional sense, but the specific discomfort of a man whose system of belief had just been handed an inconsistency it could not immediately resolve. "Killer B," A said finally. The name came out differently from everything else he had said, softer, carrying something personal. "My brother. He is a Jinchuriki. He is also the most free man I have ever known. Do not tell me every Jinchuriki's story is the same." "I am not telling you that," Kratos said. "I am telling you that the same system produced both outcomes. A free man and a 4-year-old with assassins. And a system that produces both of those things with equal facility is not a system that has resolved the question of what it is." had no answer, which was, Kratos was beginning to understand, the most honest thing the Raikage had ever offered him. Behind the cloud formation, dawn was breaking over the land of fire in long horizontal bands of amber and rose, the light catching the ice formations Kratos had made and refracting through them in prismatic patterns that were objectively beautiful and completely indifferent to everything happening beneath them. The world did not care about the argument. It simply continued, the way worlds did, accumulating light and mourning the way it accumulated everything else, without judgment, without resolution, without mercy. "There is a village," Kratos said, "that I have not yet visited, hidden in the leaves, the one with the faces carved into the mountain." He looked at us steadily. "I am going there now, not to destroy it, to understand it. If you send another force to intercept me, we will have a different conversation than the one we just had." He turned and walked toward Konoha as the sun rose around him. Behind him, stood in the field of frozen earth and watched the gray-skinned god of another world walk away, and did something he had not done since he was a child, learning that the world was larger and harder than he had initially believed. He let him go. And in the hidden leaf, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and the particular staleness of a space where someone had been occupying a bed long enough for the air itself to take on their character, Naruto Uzumaki sat up from a medical observation cot. He had taken a stray fire release technique during a training exercise 2 days prior, and the medic Nin had insisted on overnight observation that had somehow extended, and felt something move through his chakra network like a stone dropped into still water. Kurama felt it too. The 9 tails, ancient and vast and perpetually unimpressed by most things the human world produced, shifted in the mindscape where it existed in permanent near residence. When it spoke with the voice of something that had existed long enough to recognize categories of power that predated the shinobi world's entire recorded history. That, Kurama said, with an inflection Naruto had never heard from it before, not fear, not excitement, but something closer to recognition. The way you recognized a language you had not heard since childhood is not from this world. And whatever it is old, genuinely old, older than the sage, older than the concept of chakra itself. Naruto sat in his hospital bed and felt the approaching weight of something he could not name and thought, with the particular instinct that had never failed him even when every rational assessment had, that this was going to require a conversation rather than a fight. He just had to convince it of that before the fight started. Naruto met him at the village gate. Not with an army behind him, not with ANBU in the shadows performing the pantomime of invisible support, not with the formal apparatus of Hokage authority arranged to communicate institutional weight. He met him alone, in an orange jacket that had seen better days, hands in his pockets, sitting on top of the gate's wooden crossbeam with his legs dangling over the edge like a man waiting for a bus. The medical discharge papers from the hospital were still folded in his back pocket, technically unsigned, which the head medic Nin was going to have very strong feelings about later. Kratos stopped at the gate's threshold and looked up at him. Naruto looked down. "You're bigger in person," he said. "The reports said big, but they were underselling it. You were told I was coming." "Kurama told me, the 9 tails, the thing sealed inside me." He tapped his stomach with 2 fingers, the gesture casual, completely unperformed, a man referencing a fundamental fact of his own biology with neither resentment nor false equanimity, simply acknowledgement. "He recognized your energy from about 4 kilometers out, said you were old, like genuinely old, older than this world old." He tilted his head. "Are you a god?" "I was," Kratos said. "I killed the rest of them." Naruto absorbed this with a slow blink. "All of them." "All of them?" "Huh?" He dropped from the crossbeam and landed in the road in front of Kratos with the easy physical confidence of someone whose body had been pushed past its limits so many times that casual athleticism had become its resting state. Standing at ground level, he came up to approximately Kratos' chest, which meant he had to look up at a significant angle to maintain eye contact, which he did without apparent self-consciousness. Okay. So I've been thinking about how this conversation goes since Kurama woke me up, and I keep running into the same problem. Speak it. Everyone who's talked to you so far has either tried to fight you or tried to out-philosophy you, Naruto said. The Raikage went with fighting, which I heard how that went, and that tracks for him, honestly. Itachi went with the philosophy angle, which also tracks, and you're still here talking instead of burning things down, so he got somewhere. But neither of those is actually my thing. He looked at Kratos with eyes that were straightforwardly blue and straightforwardly direct and carrying, underneath the directness, a depth that had been put there by pain accumulated over a lifetime, and then chosen, actively, repeatedly chosen, not to become bitterness. My thing is simpler. I just want to understand what you're actually angry about. Kratos looked at him for a long moment. I am not angry. Yes, you are, Naruto said, without heat, without challenge, as a simple observational fact. You're the calmest angry person I've ever met, and I've met some very calm, angry people, but it's there. It's in everything, the way you hold yourself. The way you talk about the villages, not like you hate them, like they've confirmed something you already knew and the confirmation hurts even though you expected it. He paused. That's not a conqueror thing. Conquerors don't get hurt by confirmation. That's something else. The gate behind Naruto was Konoha, the village that had been his entire world for his entire life, the place that had looked at a child with a monster sealed inside him, and decided that the monster was the child, that had let him grow up eating alone and sitting alone and carrying alone, that had also eventually given him Uruka and Kakashi and Sakura and Jiraiya, and every bond that had made him something other than what the loneliness had been trying to make him. He understood, in the specific way that only people who have been failed by something they love can understand, the difference between an institution and the human warmth that sometimes survived inside it. Walk with me, Naruto said. Not into the village if you don't want, just walk. Tell me about where you're from, tell me about your son. The last two words landed with surgical precision. Not manipulative. Naruto was constitutionally incapable of manipulation, a fact that was simultaneously his greatest vulnerability and his most devastating strength, because people who could not be manipulated were also people whose sincerity could not be questioned. He had heard about the boy from Itachi's report, passed through Tsunede's office in the pre-dawn hours while the Raikage field engagement was still unresolved. He had read it once, and then set it aside and thought about it in the way he thought about things that mattered, not analytically but with his whole self, feeling around the edges of it until he understood its shape. A father looking for his son. He knew what that meant. He knew more precisely what it meant to grow up as the version of that story where the father never came. Kratos was still for a moment that lasted long enough to be significant. Then he walked, and Naruto fell into step beside him, and they moved along the perimeter road that ran outside the village wall with the morning light coming in at a low angle and the sound of Konoha beginning its day floating over the wall in fragments. A vendor calling out, children's voices from a training ground, the rhythmic percussion of someone doing early weapon drills. Kratos talked. Not fluidly. He was not a man built for fluid self-disclosure, and the account he gave was structured like a military report. Facts presented in sequence with emotional content acknowledged but not elaborated. He described the Norse realms. He described Fae, not extensively, but precisely, the way a man describes something so important that he has learned to keep it brief, because the alternative is losing the ability to continue speaking. He described Atreus with the same brevity that contained entire volumes, the boy's hunger for knowledge, his mother's gifts manifesting in him, the journey they had undertaken together, the rift that had separated them at the moment of dimensional collapse. Naruto listened the way he listened to everything that mattered completely, without the processing lag of a man preparing his next response, simply receiving. He's alive, Naruto said when Kratos finished. I don't know how I know that, but I believe it. The same way I believed Sasuke was reachable when everyone else had written him off. Some things you just know. Belief without evidence is not a strategy, Kratos said. No, Naruto agreed, but it's a foundation. You build the strategy on top of it. He was quiet for a moment. There's someone who might be able to help. Not Orochimaru. I know Itachi mentioned him, and I'm telling you now, whatever Orochimaru offers will cost more than it's worth, and the currency he prefers isn't money. He glanced up at Kratos sidelong. There's a researcher, works independently outside the village system. Her name is Karin. She was affiliated with Orochimaru once, but she's been operating alone for the last 2 years. Her sensory abilities are unlike anything in the 5 villages. She can perceive dimensional boundaries the way most sensors perceive chakra signatures. If there's a trace of the rift that brought you here, she can find it. Why do you offer this? Naruto stopped walking. He turned to face Kratos fully, and the morning light caught his face in a way that showed everything at once. The whisker marks, the sincerity, the fathomless reserves of a stubbornness that had been mistaken for optimism by people who didn't understand that genuine optimism required genuine acknowledgement of how bad things actually were. Because you haven't killed anyone, he said. Because you held back against the ANBU, and you held back against the Raikage, and you held back against everyone who came at you. And that kind of restraint from someone with your power doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somewhere underneath all of it you're still making choices about who you want to be. He paused. And because you're a father looking for his kid in a world that isn't his. And there is no version of me that doesn't try to help with that. Kratos looked at him. The coal in his chest, it did not cool exactly. But something shifted around it, the way stone shifts when water finds a crack and begins, over time, its patient work of transformation. The villages will not accept a permanent independent presence, Kratos said. The Raikage will reconvene. Others will follow. Probably, Naruto said. That's kind of a separate problem that I have a separate plan for. You let me handle the villages. You focus on Atreus. You propose to manage 5 Cage on my behalf. I propose to talk to 5 Cage on your behalf, Naruto said, with a grin that was completely genuine and slightly terrifying in its confidence. Which is a different thing. Talking is my actual power. The chakra stuff is secondary. Before Kratos could respond, Kurama's voice moved through Naruto's consciousness. Not the recognition tone from before, but something urgent, directional, carrying the particular quality of information delivered by a being whose perception operated on scales unavailable to human sensorium. There is a disturbance, Kurama said, eastern border, dimensional, the same signature as the one that brought him here, but larger, much larger. Naruto's expression shifted instantly, the grin gone, replaced by something focused and clean, the face he wore when things moved from conversation to consequence. Kratos. His voice had changed register. Something's happening at the eastern border, dimensional. Kurama says it's the same kind of energy that brought you here. Kratos was already moving before Naruto finished the sentence. The Leviathan axe was in his hand, frost spreading from the blade's edge in the morning air, and his face had resolved into the expression it wore when everything else became secondary, the expression of a father for whom every obstacle between himself and his son was simply geometry to be solved through application of sufficient force. Atreus, he said, one word, a complete sentence. They ran. Naruto matched his pace. Ninetales chakra threading through his system in a warm amber surge that brought his speed up to something that could keep stride with a god in full motion. And behind them, Konoha's mourning continued its ordinary percussion, vendors and training and children's voices, completely unaware that the axis of the situation had just rotated. That the question was no longer whether Kratos would make war on the hidden villages, but whether the hidden villages would be fast enough to matter when whatever was coming through that rift arrived. The eastern border was 40 kilometers. Kratos covered it in less than 10 minutes, moving through the land of fire's forest canopy in ground-eating strides that left impact craters at every footfall. The Leviathan axe drawing frost from the morning air in a wake of crystalline particles that caught the light and scattered it in fractured brightness behind him. Naruto ran beside him and felt Kurama's agitation building. The nine tails, ancient and vastly experienced, increasingly specific in its alarm. Not one signature, not Atreus alone. Something else had come through with the boy or behind him or because of him, something that made the tailed beast's perception of dimensional energy spike in a way it had not done in centuries. "Prepare yourself," Kurama said, and the fact that it said it to Naruto rather than to Kratos, said it with the inflection of warning rather than information, meant it was not Atreus that concerned it. It was what had followed Atreus through. The rift was visible from 2 kilometers, a vertical tear in the world's fabric that made the one Kratos had arrived through look like a paper cut. This was a wound. It bled light in colors that had no name in any language the shinobi world had developed, Norse runes cycling through it in cascading sequences that spoke of something vast and structured and purposeful, and through the dimensional howl of it came two things simultaneously. The first was a boy, teenage lean, with a bow across his back and eyes that held the particular expression of someone who had been falling for a very long time, and was not entirely sure the falling had stopped. He hit the ground in a roll, came up in a crouch, assessed his surroundings with the trained alertness of someone who had been raised in the wild space between 9 Norse realms, and had learned early that every new environment was potentially lethal until proven otherwise. He looked up and found Kratos standing 20 meters away. Something moved across the boy's face that was too large for a single word. It broke through everything, the alertness, the training, the carefully maintained composure of a young man who had decided that composure was necessary, and what it broke into was simply relief, enormous and unguarded and completely unconcealed. "Father," Atreus said. And the second thing came through the rift. It came through roaring. It was massive, not in the way that tailed beasts were massive, not in the way that summoned creatures were massive, but in the dimensional sense, as though its true scale existed in a space larger than the physical world could fully contain, and what appeared on the eastern border of the land of fire was simply the portion of it that the world was capable of expressing. It was armored in something that was not metal and not bone, but the specific material of divine punishment crystallized into physical form, and its eyes were the color of a sun going out. And when it moved, the ground did not shake so much as the concept of ground became briefly uncertain. A realm walker, a creature that moved between dimensional boundaries not by traveling through them but by consuming them. Drawn by the catastrophic energy of a failed rift like deep-water predators were drawn by blood in open ocean. It had followed Atreus through because Atreus was carrying Faye's ashes still, and Faye's ashes were charged with the residual divinity of a giant whose power signature read, to anything that hunted across dimensional boundaries, like a beacon. It had not come for Kratos. It had come for the boy. Kratos looked at the realm walker. He looked at Atreus, who had risen to his feet and was already reaching for his bow with the automatic competence of a young man for whom danger and preparation had become nearly simultaneous reflexes. He looked at Naruto beside him, Ninetales chakra flaring in that amber surge, blue eyes wide but steady, already reading the situation with the instinctive tactical clarity of someone who had faced things that should not have been survivable and had chosen to survive them anyway. The coal in his chest was gone. In its place was something that had no name in Greek or Norse, but that every father in every world across every mythology had felt in the moment when the thing they had been protecting from everything arrived in the same space as everything at once. He raised the Leviathan axe. "Atreus," he said, without looking away from the realm walker, "stay behind me." "Father, I can." "Behind me." A beat, then the sound of boots on earth as the boy moved, not in retreat but in the tactical repositioning of a partner who understood that some arguments were worth having after the immediate problem was resolved, and not before. Naruto shifted to Kratos' left, chakra fully deployed, tails of golden energy beginning to form at his back in the early stages of a transformation that Kurama was already driving toward full expression, because Kurama, unlike most entities, had no illusions about what category of threat had just arrived. The Realm Walker looked at Kratos. Kratos looked at the Realm Walker. Somewhere above them, a messenger hawk that had been dispatched toward the hidden leaf the moment the rift became visible was already crossing the sky, carrying a description that every cage would read within the hour. The hidden villages were about to have to decide, with considerable urgency, what they believed about the gray-skinned god who had walked through their formations like weather and then chosen, repeatedly, not to kill anyone. Because the thing that had come through the rift had no such philosophy. And the only thing currently standing between it and the land of fire was a man who had already destroyed one world's worth of gods and a boy in an orange jacket who had made a career out of standing in front of things that should have been too large to stop. The Realm Walker moved. The ground became uncertain. And the ghost of Sparta, reunited with his son on a foreign world soil, did what he had always done when something vast and terrible decided that something he loved was acceptable collateral.